not sure.
Registering Republican for the upcoming primary, because all of this will mean nothing if we aren't registered Republican, and we have to vote. So my name's Derek, and I'm seriously so excited to be here with you guys. I would like to begin by thanking the college Republicans, Youth for Ron Paul, the faculty and staff here at Cal State Fullerton, all my friends here. We all needed everyone's cooperation to make this possible. So tonight we have the privilege of listening to a gentleman that has dedicated his life to the service of others, in both the public and private sectors. When he was called upon by his country, he served as the United States Air Force flight surgeon. As a medical physician, he delivered over 4,000 babies. And during his practice, he never accepted any payments from Medi-Cal or Medicaid.
Attaboy.
Instead, he either lowered the fees or waived them completely for those who could not afford them. He began his public service as a congressman in the late 70s and has been consistent ever since. He predicted the economic crisis and the bursting of the housing bubble. In 2007, he was the only person bringing up these issues, but nobody took his warning seriously. He is the biggest advocate of America's youth, who not only have the highest unemployment rate, but will be inheriting a debt that's over $15 trillion and is rapidly rising. However, like John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, he also believes in the concept of the shining city on the hill, and that the best way to promote democracy and freedom around the world is by leading by example. By having a sound currency, and a vibrant economy. It is my pleasure right now to introduce to you Texas Congressman, the champion of the Constitution.
Sounds like there's a revolutionary spirit in town tonight. I think the election's coming to an end. The revolution is just getting going. Before I get started, I want to introduce my wife Carol and our granddaughter Linda sitting down here. Derek, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Thank you all for coming out. What a wonderful evening. It's really, really a pleasure, and it gives me a lot of encouragement to see such enthusiasm, because the issues are so vital, so important. And I am so encouraged to know that so many young people especially are saying, you know, things have to change. We can't continue to do what we're doing. And this is what the revolution is all about. But it's a revolution that's a special revolution. It's a nonviolent intellectual revolution. It's not a brand new idea because it's more or less just a continuation of those ideas that made America great, and for some reason, unfortunately, they forgot about 100 years ago, and we need to revive that spirit of liberty once again in this country. Things have definitely changed recently, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, in the last 10 years. I've been more or less talking about some of these issues for 30 years, and I noticed a big difference, but it's dramatically different in the last 5 years, because the American people have awakened and found out that we do not have a sound economic policy. And so many now realize that we don't have sound money, and we need to do something about our Federal Reserve system. Now, the monetary system is very vital. If you want to really understand the cause of liberty and the purpose of liberty and sound economic policies, you have to deal with monetary policy. But also something else has happened in the last 4 to 5 years. There's been several of us in Washington trying to fight and thwart off the wars that we've gotten involved in and have a different type of foreign policy. Not a foreign policy of aggression, not a foreign policy of violence, but a foreign policy that is designed with friendship and trade to all nations willing to trade and be friends of this country. But for some reason, there's still a lot of people in Washington that don't quite understand that we are less respected and less liked when we invade countries, bomb countries, occupy countries, tell other people what to do, bribe their dictators. So there's another option. And the American people are hearing about it, and they're understanding it, and that is why now 75% of the American people have come to our viewpoint and said, it's time to come home, get out of Afghanistan, bring the troops home. So there is a definite different attitude with economic policy, the Federal Reserve, and also the foreign policy. But there's also an awakening in this country that there has been a systematic attack on our civil liberties, and we have to stand up and say no more. The purpose of government is to protect our liberty, not to destroy our liberty. For instance, the founders were very proud of the Fourth Amendment. They wanted privacy. They didn't want the king and the military coming into their homes without permission and without warrants. And yet today, we're living under a law that says that the Fourth Amendment has very little meaning, and the president and the executive branch can do just about whatever they want. This is the reason I had talked about it before it was passed and since it's been passed. And I believe it should be one of the first things that we repeal once in office, and that is getting rid of the Patriot Act. But in all these areas, the American people are waking up, whether it has this attack on our personal civil liberties, whether it is our attack on our First Amendment rights, whether it's the understanding of economics, which is coming around to making more sense, as well as the foreign policy. And this is what is dramatically different. And it's dramatically different on the campuses of this country. We're getting thousands of people coming out. And if you look for the information about what is happening, guess what? The revolution is not being described on TV. But the good side of it, we have the internet. And the scary part of it and they're trying to take the internet away from us, and we're not going to let them take the internet away. Systematically in Washington, D.C., they want to use the internet to control and understand. They just recently built the biggest thing in the history of the world, and that is a National Security Agency compound out in Utah that can hold more records than any one establishment before. Trillions and trillions of dollars of items on all individuals in this country. They don't need that kind of information. They're supposed to do the opposite. We're supposed to have openness in government and privacy for the people, not attacking the privacy of the people. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there were quite a few, mostly the economists that were in the Austrian economic camp. Were very much aware of the financial bubble and warned about it, and sure enough, it came. Well, the financial bubble comes from the ability of the Fed to monetize debt, which is an encouragement, it's a facilitator, it's a taxer, because if governments can spend endlessly for the benefit of buying votes for the individuals to stay in office, and they never have to worry about paying the bills in the near term, you can tax for a while, there's a limit you can tax, and you can borrow for a while, and then interest rates go up, but then you have this facilitator, this instrument of creating new money, and then we had this benefit of us issuing the reserve currency of the world, a trusted, because the dollar used to be as good as gold. But the strange thing happened when the gold was removed in 1971, there still remained a fair amount of trust. Now they're still under the illusion in Washington that the trust will remain forever. But guess what? The trust isn't there anymore, and it's rapidly disappearing. And this is why this recession is different, and it's worldwide. There's a crisis in Europe. They admit now they're going back into recession. And of course, we haven't solved our problems because we're all facing the same problem. Government has gotten too big, they fight too many wars, they undermine liberties, write too many regulations, and manipulate the economy too much. So the predictable crises come, and guess what they do in Washington? Congress, the executive branch, the Federal Reserve, they say, oh, we're in trouble now. So what we need to do is spend more money, borrow more money, have more regulations, and let the Fed print money endlessly. How can you solve the problem? You cannot solve the problem of too much spending and too big a government by spending more and making the government bigger. You have to do the opposite. Next year is going to be an important year. It'll be the anniversary of something that happened in 1913. And that will be the appropriate year on the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve. We'll repeal the Federal Reserve. To really understanding what personal liberty is all about, they will realize what Jefferson talked about, that we have a God-given right to our life and our liberty, and we ought to have a God-given right to keep the fruits of our labor as well. Which means the 16th Amendment needs repealed just as well. Give the incentive to the people to work and keep what they earn. Believe me, they will work harder. Today, productive energy is not released in this country. If somebody really wants to get productive, how many jobs are going overseas? There's a lot of U.S. companies right now that are adding jobs, but when you look at it, the jobs are being added overseas. So there is so much we can do here to encourage individuals to come back. The tragedy here in this country is if you're on the receiving end, if you know the inside track, you get the benefits as the bubble is being blown up, and then when the crunch comes, guess what? They get bailed out. We need to stop all the bailouts. They don't deserve the bailout. A lot of this mainly because of a misunderstanding of the entitlement system. The entitlements sounds like an entitlement is a right, but an entitlement isn't a right. You have a right to your life. You have a right to ownership of your life. You have a right to your liberty. You should have the right to the fruits of your labor. But entitlement means that you're entitled to somebody else's life or somebody else's productive effort, somebody else's wealth. No, you don't have that. But it's always well-intended to say, well, this is only for the poor people, the people falling through the cracks, and they're entitled to own a house. And, of course, that led to the housing bubble. And they're entitled to free food and free education on down. There is no such thing as free stuff. You have to take it from somebody. So it reminds me of my little bumper sticker in Washington, D.C. It says simply, don't steal. The government hates competition. But the entitlement system, although it has been designed, and many people believe, and they're very sincere, and they say, we do care about our fellow man, and we want to make sure that nobody's poor, and we're going to take care of it. But guess what? The entitlement system takes care of the wealthy. It's the Goldman Sachs of the world, it's the banking system, the military-industrial complex, the whole mess. They feel entitled, and they throw the crumbs to the poor, and then when there's a crisis, the rich get bailed out, and the poor get poorer, the middle class loses their jobs, and they end up losing their houses as well. So this is the reason why we have to challenge the whole notion of the entitlement system. You're entitled to your freedoms, and the government should be protecting your liberties, not pretending it can redistribute wealth and create wealth by doing it. It destroys wealth under those conditions. Very simply, in order to restore a sound economy and get jobs back here again, I think we should cut spending. But that's such a strange idea in Washington. Even our side of the aisle has a proposal to look like they're cutting spending, but they're only cutting proposed increases. In the next 10 years, the proposed increases are about $10 trillion. So if they cut them down to $9 or $8 trillion, say, oh, look, we just cut $2 trillion. I want to cut $1 trillion of real money in the first year in office. A lot of people worry about it, and they say, oh, won't that cause a crash in the economy, and this will really wreck things? You can't do that. But what about saving all this money on the wars? Wouldn't that be a good place to start? In the last 10 years, there was $4 trillion added to our debt by fighting these wars overseas. Now, the founders had a good way of restraining us from getting involved in war. They simply wrote into the Constitution that only Congress can declare the war, and which means that Congress is the closest to the people, so the people have a say through their congressmen whether or not we will make this precise declaration of going to war. Since World War II, we haven't done it. Since World War II, we haven't won a war. Since World War II, we've spent trillions of dollars and loss of hundreds of thousands of lives and hundreds of thousands of people injured. And just think of the tragedy of the injured that's coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan now. If you look at what kind of lives that we have lost in the last 10 years since 9/11, Americans, soldiers and contractors, we've lost 8,500. That's not a fair deal. I understand 9/11 very, very well, but going into a policy where we spend a lot of money, bankrupt ourselves, and a lot of Americans get killed, that's not very good payback. We need to wise up and have a different type of foreign policy. So declaring war on the world by a global war on terrorism, terrorism is a monstrous thing to deal with, but by marching around the world believing that we have the moral authority to bomb any country, any place, because there might be a terrorist hiding behind a bush, and having secret weapons, and having drone missiles directed from individuals in the United States and going over, and guess what? We make mistakes. I mean, do we know that we kill the right people? No. We know that a lot of children and a lot of innocent people die, and we know that every time you kill one over there under those circumstances, you probably create another 100 who's saying, why are we being terrorized by bombs falling out of the sky? We haven't done anything to the American people. of money out of the military. We can have priorities. If we continue to do what we're doing, we're going to bring in the destruction of the currency, and even the Social Security recipients and the elderly getting medical care and the children's health care and education program, they will come crashing down, because when the money doesn't work, nothing works. So we could work our way out of it, but we can't do it by spending more money and printing more money. It won't work, and I think the American people know it, that it can't work. My idea of cutting $1 trillion sends a message that we're going to get our house in order. We can start with overseas spending. We don't need to give away foreign aid. I'm convinced that foreign aid is taking money from poor people in this country and giving it to rich people in poor countries. And it ends up to be a political football, and it doesn't help the people it's supposed to help over there. It helps the government. And besides, if we're a very wealthy country and doing well and setting the example, we as individuals can decide where to send our money and help the people truly in need. And even in the midst of this recession, the American people have been very generous. There's still crises around the world, and the American people come. It's so much better than depending on government bureaucrats and special interests doing these kind of things. So we can make these cuts. If we do this, the other suggestion I have is going back to the 2006 budget. And the government wasn't too small in 2006. It was still rather big, so it's not like we're destroying the whole government. We're just going back to a more modest time and getting rid of a few departments, like, say, 5 of them to begin with. I don't think we need the Department of Energy passing out ethanol benefits to anybody, so there's a lot of things that we can do to spend a lot less money. And if we did that, we don't have to start. I think politically, it's a mistake to start on child health care or food for poor people or the elderly health care. Now, those programs theoretically shouldn't have started, and they're not working. If we continue to do this, they're all going to come crashing down. But if we want to work our way out of it, we have to say where we're going to cut, and we should get the people, right, left, center, independents, to agree that coming home and stop spending this money overseas during these wars would be the easiest place. Cut these others and try to preserve these programs and let people get weaned off. For instance, I think it would be just great if we did this and offered everybody that's coming out of college right now and having a tough time, if you wanted to assume responsibility for yourself, to stay out of the Social Security system and keep your own money and take care of yourself. Founders are rather clear about the foreign policy. Their strong suggestion was that we have friendship and trade with as many countries as possible, any that are willing. Now, so often I will be charged, and you will as well, and say, oh, you're a bunch of isolationists. You don't want to deal with the world. Oh, yeah, we want to trade with the world. We want to travel. We want to go back and forth. We want to engage. And the individuals who have the sharpest criticism and call us isolationists are the ones who are the very first ones to put on sanctions on countries trying to start another war.